The single fluorescent bulb in the red roof in-room flickered, casting a sickly yellow light on the two of us. I stood by the door, my hand still on the knob, the cheap laminate peeling beneath my fingers. Across from me, Jareth sat hunched on the edge of a bed, the vinyl headboard cracked where it met the wall. I had just driven 9 hours, listening to my mother Maribel cry on the phone for most of it. Her voice was a broken whisper. He just said not to expect you, Neoma. Not to even buy a gift. The words had turned into a cold hard knot in my stomach. Now, looking at Jareth's face, not the face of the brother I knew, but of a stranger with hollowed-out eyes, the knot tightened into a fist. I finally understood. The allowance wasn't just a gift. It was a lifeline. For 2 years I'd been the one managing the money from the trust his parents left him, the money that paid for his education, his rent, his car. It was the only thing I had left to hold over him, and he had just used it to tear our family apart. The Christmas he didn't want me to have. The family he was pretending I didn't belong to. My heart was a frozen, jagged thing in my chest. "You're done," I said, the words barely audible. "The allowance. It's done." It all started the summer I turned 10. A social worker's car, a white sedan with rust spots creeping along the fender wells, pulled into our gravel driveway. My foster father, Oswin, who was always so calm and steady, met the woman at the door. He came back inside with a boy who looked like he'd been carved out of stone. His eyes were wide and dark, his limbs thin and rigid. This was Jareth. He was 12, the same age my biological brother would have been. He had just lost both his parents in a highway accident, a brutal, sudden absence that had left him with nothing but a half-full duffel bag and a deep, silent terror. Maribel, my foster mother, had taken my hand and whispered, "He needs us, Neoma." I had looked at Jareth, so small and lost, and something in me had cracked open. I didn't know what it was to lose a parent, not really, but I knew what it felt like to be alone. I was a foster kid too. I saw a mirror in his eyes, a shared history of being a satellite, a wanderer. Our parents had promised to build a home for us, not just a house. Jareth was the first piece of that impossible puzzle. The initial weeks were silent. He would sit at the kitchen table, a book open in front of him, but his eyes were always watching, always scanning the room. He didn't eat much, he didn't speak. Oswin would sit with him for hours, not saying a word, just being present. One afternoon I saw him drawing in a small tattered notebook. The pages were filled with intricate, breathtaking sketches of old rusted cars and sprawling, complicated engines. He drew the world as he saw it, in all its broken, metallic detail. I had never seen anything like it. It was like he was trying to put a broken world back together with a pencil. I sat down next to him, picking up my own notebook. I didn't say anything, I just started to draw. He looked at me for a moment, then back at his page. It was a wordless conversation, and it was the first real moment we had. We bonded over art and Oswin's rusty old truck. Jareth would lie under it for hours, his hands covered in grease, and I would sit next to him, sketching the worn tires and the peeling paint. It was our sanctuary, the place where we could be ourselves without words. The trust fund was a complicated thing. Jareth's biological parents, wealthy and reclusive, had set it up to provide for him until he turned 25. But a clause in the will stipulated that the money could only be accessed with the approval of a court-appointed guardian. Since Oswin and Maribel had taken him in, they had been managing it, but as their own business struggled, they found themselves relying on a portion of the fund to keep the lights on in the house from foreclosure. They felt guilty about it. I knew, and it became a hushed, difficult topic in our home. I was old enough to understand the weight of their sacrifice, the way they were prioritizing Jareth's future over their own immediate needs. It was a burden they carried with quiet dignity. They had always told us that we were more than just people living under the same roof. We were family. Jareth's allowance, the money that came from the trust, was a constant reminder of the pain he had gone through. It was a symbol of the impossible decision my parents had to make every month. It was also a symbol of our love for him. He had always been so grateful, always so aware of the debt he owed. As the years went by, Jareth began to change. He became more withdrawn, more secretive. The quiet boy who drew engines and fixed old trucks was gone. In his place was a young man with a chip on his shoulder, a constant low-level anger simmering beneath the surface. He went to college on a full scholarship, but he barely spoke to us. He would call Maribel on the phone and their conversations would be short, strained. He never asked about me. He never asked about Oswin. The Christmas before last he had come home for a week, and it had been pure torture. He had barely looked at us. He spent the entire time on his phone muttering into the receiver in hushed tones. It was as if he was living a secret life, a life that didn't include us. The allowance became a point of contention, a silent transaction that felt more like a ransom than a gift. I remember standing in the hallway one night, listening to him whisper into the phone. The words were low and garbled, but I heard one word clearly: Christmas. And then a name I didn't recognize. My heart sank. Something was wrong. Jarrett's coldness was a physical thing, a barrier I could almost touch. He would come home for holidays and sit in the corner of the living room, scrolling through his phone, a phantom in our family's home movie. He had grown so tall and broad-shouldered, but he still had that same haunted look in his eyes. The last time I had seen him, he had flinched when I reached out to touch his arm. "Don't," he'd said, his voice flat. It was as if I had burned him. Our last conversation had been about the allowance. I had asked him, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" And he had just shrugged, his eyes glued to his phone. "Just send the money, Neoma," he'd said. "That's all I need." The words had stung more than a slap. They were a confession. He didn't need us, he just needed the money. And now my mother's broken voice on the phone. "He said not to expect you." The words echoed in my mind. He didn't want me at Christmas. He didn't want the family that had taken him in, that had loved him, that had sacrificed for him. He only wanted the allowance. But why? The conversation with my mother was the worst part. She was so excited about Christmas, about having us all together again. She had planned to buy Jareth a new leather jacket, something she had seen on a mannequin at the mall. I had tried to tell her not to, that he would probably be rude about it, but she wouldn't listen. She had been so hopeful. She was already baking cookies and buying wrapping paper, and then Jareth called. I wasn't there, but I could hear her voice, how it changed, how it became quiet and small. She hung up the phone and walked into the living room, her face pale. She just sat down on the couch, staring into the fireplace. "He said he wasn't coming," she'd said, "and he told me not to expect you either." I had stood there shocked. Why would he say that? Why would he lie to her, to the woman who had given him everything? The anger that had been simmering inside me for years boiled over. I drove to the Red Roof Inn, my mind racing. I was ready to cancel the allowance, ready to cut him off. He had betrayed us, and I was going to make him pay. But the moment I saw him, something shifted. He wasn't the monster I had made him out to be. He looked scared, and that's when I saw it. The thing he was holding in his hand. It wasn't a phone, it was a picture of a baby wrapped in a blanket. It was a girl. The picture was a gut punch. It was a faded Polaroid, and a tiny swaddled infant was looking up at the camera. The small wrinkled hand was clutching a blanket, and there was a tiny mole on her cheek. The kind you don't notice unless you look closely. I didn't know who the baby was, but I knew with a certainty that made my hands shake, that this was the reason for all the secrets, all the lies, all the cold distance. This wasn't just about money. I felt the fury that had been building inside me for months drain away, replaced by a hollow ache. "Who is she, Jareth?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He flinched, as if the question was a physical blow. He didn't say anything, just stared at the wall, his eyes glazed over. "The allowance," he finally said, his voice raw. "Is it really gone?" The desperation in his voice was a new kind of pain. I had expected him to fight me, to rage, but he just looked defeated. I hadn't expected him to be so broken. I took the picture from his hand. It was creased and worn from being carried around. I studied the baby's face, the little tufts of dark hair on her head. She was beautiful. I looked back at Jareth, his face a mask of misery. "The allowance," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know I have to tell Maribel and Oswin." His eyes, so full of despair just a moment ago, now filled with a wild, animalistic fear. "No. You can't. Please, Neoma, you can't tell them." He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Please just don't." I stared at him, trying to comprehend the sheer terror in his voice. He had always been so proud, so stoic. Now he was begging. I pulled my arm away. "Jareth, you're sending all this money, you're lying to us, and you won't even tell me why. What am I supposed to think? That you've betrayed us for this secret?" He shook his head, his face contorted in pain. "You don't understand. This isn't about betrayal. This is about, I He was talking in riddles, and I was losing my patience. I wanted answers, not more secrets. I had been keeping a record of every withdrawal from the trust fund. It was part of my role as the manager of his finances. The bank statements were all in my name, and I had been a meticulous record keeper. I had noticed the strange transfers months ago, but I hadn't wanted to believe it. Now, sitting in the red ravine, with the picture of the baby in my hand, I pulled out my phone and went through the records. He had been sending large round sums of money every week to a single account, an account I had never seen before. The first few transfers had been small, but they had grown steadily, becoming larger and larger, until they were almost the entirety of his monthly allowance. He was living on nothing, starving himself to feed this other person. My heart ached for him, but I was also furious. He had been lying to me, to all of us, for so long. He had let us worry. He had let us think he was a cold, ungrateful stranger. He had let our family fall apart. He saw the bank statements on my phone, and his shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew he was caught. He finally started talking, the words a torrent of guilt and pain. He told me about college, about the girl he had met, and about the secret they had been keeping. He had wanted to tell us, but he had been too afraid. He had been so young, so foolish. He had thought he could handle it all on his own. He had thought he could provide for this baby and still keep his life, his family, his education. But it had become too much. He had been working 3 jobs, trying to keep up with the expenses, but he had been falling further and further behind. The girl, he said, had left him, had taken the baby and disappeared. He had spent the last 2 years trying to find them, trying to make things right. He had finally found them, but the girl wanted nothing to do with him. She had given him an ultimatum. She would let him see the baby, but only if he could provide for her. He had been desperate, and he had been doing everything he could. The truth was a heavy, suffocating thing. I looked at the boy across from me, and I saw a stranger again. Not the boy I had grown up with. Not the brother I had loved. I had thought he was a monster, but he was just a scared kid who had made a mistake. He had let his fear turn him into someone he wasn't, and now he was paying the price. He was so far away from the boy I had known, the boy who had trusted me. I felt the familiar burn of betrayal, but it was now laced with a new kind of sadness. I had been so angry, so righteous in my anger, but now, all I felt was pity. He had been living a lie, and he had been doing it for this baby, for this child he had never even met. I looked at the picture in my hand, at the tiny innocent face. The thought of this child, of this baby being so close but so far away, was a crushing weight. He had been lying to me, to all of us, for this baby, but why had he told Maribel not to expect me for Christmas? The question burned in my mind. It didn't make sense. And then he said a name I recognized. I had to do it, Neoma, he said, his voice raw. For her, for Cassidy. My blood ran cold. The name was so familiar. It was the name of my biological mother. And suddenly all the pieces clicked into place. The world spun on its axis. My mother, Cassidy. I hadn't seen her in 10 years. The last time I had seen her, she had been a ghost, a hollowed-out version of herself, a woman who had given up on life and on her children. She had left me with Maribel and Oswin, and she had never looked back. The pain of her abandonment had been a silent wound, a scar I had carried with me my entire life. And now, Jareth was telling me that he had been supporting her. My stomach lurched. He had been taking the money that was meant for his future, and he had been giving it to her. To the woman who had abandoned me, the woman who had broken my heart. The anger I had felt before. The betrayal, it was nothing compared to this. This was a new kind of pain. This was a betrayal on a cosmic scale. I looked at Jareth and I saw a stranger. Not a brother, not a friend, just a liar. He saw the look on my face, and he knew he had made a terrible mistake. He tried to explain, to tell me about how he had found her, how she was sick, how she was dying, but I couldn't hear him. The words were a torrent of noise, a background hum in my mind. All I could see was her face, her eyes, the way she had looked at me when she had left me. The way she had looked at me as if I was nothing, as if I was a mistake. I had loved her so much. I had tried so hard to be the perfect daughter, to be good enough for her to stay. But she had left. And now Jareth was telling me that he had been helping her. My stomach twisted into a knot. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage, but all I could do was stand there frozen, the Polaroid of the baby in my hand, the ghost of my mother's face in my mind. Jareth finally stopped talking. He looked at me, his eyes full of a new kind of pain. He knew he had lost me. He had spent so long lying, so long keeping this secret, that he had forgotten how to tell the truth. He had forgotten who he was. He was just a ghost, a shadow of the boy he had once been. I took a deep breath. The air was thick and heavy with the scent of cheap cleaning chemicals. Why? I finally asked, the word a whisper. Why her? He looked at me, and his eyes filled with tears. Because she was my mother, he said. My heart stopped. He wasn't talking about Cassidy. He was talking about his own mother, his biological mother, the one who had died in the car accident. He had found her, and he had been helping her. She was not the one he was helping. He was helping the mother of the baby in the picture, the girl he had left behind. The truth was a relief, but it was also a new kind of pain. He had been helping a stranger. He had been helping a girl he had never met. He had been so consumed by guilt, by the need to make things right, that he had forgotten about me, about our family. He had let us all fall apart. He had been so lost in his own world of pain and regret that he had forgotten to be a son, a brother, a friend. I looked at him, and I saw a child who had been so broken, so lost, that he had tried to fix everything on his own. He was just a boy, and he had been carrying this burden, this secret, for so long. He finally told me the full truth. The Christmas he had cancelled, the Christmas he had told Maribel not to expect me. It was because he was going to tell me everything. He was going to give me all the money, everything he had left, so that I could go and find my mother. He had been so consumed by the need to make amends, to do something good, that he had tried to fix my pain with money. He was going to give me his entire inheritance, everything he had left, to find the woman who had abandoned me. He was going to sacrifice everything, his own future for me. The weight of his sacrifice was a crushing thing. He had been so desperate, so lost, that he had tried to buy my love back with a lie. He had tried to fix me with money. We sat in silence for a long time, the words a heavy, suffocating weight in the room. I finally looked at him, and I saw the boy I had grown up with. The boy who had been so lost, so alone, so broken. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold and clammy. "You're my brother," I said. He looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. "I know," he said. And then he said the words that changed everything. "I'm so sorry." The words were a quiet, tearful confession. He was sorry for everything. The lies, the secrets, the pain. He was sorry. I had come to the Red Roof Inn to cancel the allowance, to punish him for what he had done. But I was leaving with a new understanding, a new love for the boy who had tried so hard to be a man. We didn't talk about the money. We didn't talk about the future. We just sat there in the silence, two broken souls, finally together. I had come to cancel his allowance, but I had found my brother. The next morning I went to the bank. I withdrew every single dollar from the trust fund, all $200,000. Jareth was with me, his face pale, his hands shaking. He had been so sure that I was going to do it. He had been so sure that I was going to abandon him. But I wasn't. I was going to do the right thing. I was going to give him a choice. We walked out of the bank and stood on the sidewalk, the money in a small black duffel bag. I looked at him, and I saw the boy who had been so lost, so broken. I handed him the bag. "It's yours," I said. "Go and find her. Go and find your daughter." His eyes filled with tears. He looked at me, and I saw the boy who had always been my brother, the boy who had always been my family. He took the bag, and he walked away. He walked away from me, from our family, from our home. But he wasn't alone. He was a father now, and he was finally going home.